Okay, we are here with the introduction to the Leadership EQ series. Very much a game changer. I'm Juan Kingsbury. This is Carla Fugit. And so Carla actually does a great job of explaining why this is of value with her backseat driver analogy.
Well, I think in the world of developing our own strengths, having self-awareness is the most important when I really think about that. So I like to say that if we don't have self-awareness, it's like living life in the backseat. But when we do have really keen self-awareness, it's like being the driver. We have our gas pedal, our accelerator, our GPS, airbags, we know where we're going. And it's much better to be intentional and proactive than reactive.
Yeah. And for me, EQ matters. It's been popular for a long time, but I realize when I'm not using that, when I'm that backseat driver, I'm wasting so much time and energy. Kind of actually, I'll double down on your analogy. If you ever take an Uber or a taxi and you know they're going the wrong way and you don't say something. So EQ, really a game changer. And what it is are 5 soft skills that we'll break down in the next video and then follow up with more in-depthly. But these are all about things that you, one, need to know, but also regularly practice. And so who this is for, Carla, in your experience, who has benefited from EQ and working on this?
I think EQ is for everyone, but we have all kinds of statistical information showing that for leaders in particular, 90% of the difference between an okay and a really amazing leader is emotional intelligence. So it's for everyone, but it's a game changer when you are a leader or a people leader.
Yeah, and I've seen it used with elite athletes. Think about you have 2 free throws left with no time on the clock. That pressure is cooking. I've seen it used or applied with healthcare professionals. That there's a whole physician burnout, if not worse, epidemic out there. And so EQ, it might be soft, but the consequences or the opportunities can be very fruitful once you get to that front seat, driving seat. So we'll give a little bit about ourselves, but we can't wait to help you, the leader, those of you who are mid-level management executives, those of you who just know, what, I could be more in control of my situation. So Carla, give us a little bit about your background.
I've been working with optimizing talent really for 20 plus years, a little bit of time in human resources, extensive time in training and facilitation, and really organizational effectiveness the last 12 years, and deeply passionate about helping people understand their strengths.
Excellent.
And speed bumps.
And speed bumps, nice. And so Platinum Business Strategies, and then I'm Juan Kingsbury with Career Blind Spot. Carla and I actually share similar tools. I help leaders with hiring and development opportunities or sometimes issues. And so we are very excited to introduce this game-changing concept, and we'll see you on the next video.
Stay tuned.
Okay, so the next question is, what is EQ? What is emotional quotient or emotional intelligence? Those 2 words are synonymous. But what is it? Is it soft, squishy stuff? What's your quick go-to answer for your clients and people you help, Carla?
So people, I think, often get really a little bit of a pushback to the word emotion because, if you grew up with parents or a teacher saying, don't cry, it shows weakness, emotion doesn't feel right. But really it is our soft skills. It's our ability to relate with people and our social intelligence. It's how we connect with others. Yeah. So we have 5 dimensions Juan's going to jump through with us.
Yeah, and so actually, but I'll piggyback on that area of soft skills. It's you can't measure it the same way you would measure how many words per minute you type or what kind of code you know. And so it's something that you definitely, anyone can develop and probably should develop if you're trying to be a more effective leader. But as Carla said, the 5, self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, social awareness, and social skills. So 5 soft skills or emotional areas that you can actually work on, explore, that isn't just about, hey, let's be nicer to each other. You might want to do that, but it is more about how can I be more effective or at least identify those pitfalls. Why? Why do we want to know about these 5 things? We went from 1 thing of EQ to 5. Why is that important that we know about that, Carla?
Well, again, we know that as leaders, we have a much better opportunity to be effective with emotional intelligence, but they all kind of build on one another. So self-awareness is really, I would call it our emotional antennas. If I'm happy, why am I happy? And how can I continue to be happy? If I'm sad, why am I sad? And what is that telling me? Self-regulation is kind of our filter. It's the ability also to suspend judgment and not cast stones at others. Motivation, pursuing things with energy and persistence. It's not just about making money or achieving goals, but what are the things that really give us passion about what we're doing? Empathy is also a term for social awareness, and that's probably the most universally used word with EQ.
Yeah.
I like to say it's the ability to meet people where they are. It's sensing their emotional makeup, but it's meeting them where they are. And social skills or social regulation, it's the ability to build bridges and networks and connect with all different kinds of people. So a couple of other cool things, if you're more of an introvert or an extrovert, there are tendencies that we might have with some of those to be, for an example, an introvert might not be very, they might over self-regulate, and an extrovert might under self-regulate.
Yeah, very good point.
The really cool thing about EQ is that we can absolutely develop these skills. They are all something with a little bit of awareness and enthusiasm. We can develop emotional intelligence.
Yeah. And again, going back to that, why is it important to not just understand that, hey, emotions happen, but also these 5 metrics is as a leader, as a human being, probably when you go home, especially if there's more than you at home, your emotions and others, even if you're the most Zen master, there's other people who might not be as emotionally as aware as you are. So there's different muscle groups that you would want to explore. So not just at work, not just with your personal life, or I should say additionally with your personal life, but also maybe your goals at the gym, or your goals with your outside committees that you're a part of, or your group of friends. Your emotions are going to take you everywhere. I always relate it to stubbing your toe. It doesn't matter if you're in your suit or if you're just getting out of bed, like it hurts. You don't decide that it hurts. What you do about it or say, that is the resilience, that is the muscle. So brief background, our next series of each video will now dive deeper on those 5 areas that I and Carla just gave you a brief intro to. So we will see you for the next round.
Stay tuned.
All right. First up with emotional intelligence or emotional quotient EQ is self-awareness. Do you even know what your emotional temperature is? And so going back to Carla's example in the intro, being the backseat driver, that's something that when she told me that, I was like, I feel what that is. So how do you know you're aware of your strengths, your speed bumps, Carla? How do you use self-awareness?
Well, I think it really takes some mindfulness, because if you're not, you're sort of being in the backseat or you're on autopilot. So I would recommend checking in with yourself. A couple of things. Self-awareness relates to our own, like you said, Juan, strengths and speed bumps, but also, am I confident? Am I really keenly aware of what my negotiables are, my non-negotiables? Do I feel like I can take on a tough challenge? Something else, maybe you're in the middle of a meeting and you start feeling that yucky feeling, checking in with yourself and saying, why am I feeling this way? Maybe I'm feeling sad, or maybe I'm feeling despondent or bored, but it's an awareness. I mean, think about it. If you get a headache, it's your body saying something, right? Take action. It might be drink more water. It might be have some more coffee, have some caffeine to dilate your blood vessels. But it's the same thing. When we experience an emotion, it's giving us information. So when we don't tune into that, we don't navigate our choices as proactively as when we are tuned into our emotions.
Yeah. And I think this is the one, I know for me personally, when I first was introduced to EQ and self-awareness, I was like, oh yeah, I'm the first one to raise my hand if I'm really mad or overly excited and I'm talking too much or whatever the case. But in my experience, a lot of people are very unaware when they are emotional. And I'm not saying in the next one we'll talk about more that I handle it well, but I'm just saying I've been pretty good about realizing I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm jealous, I'm tired, I'm overly caffeinated. But this is like, again, when you're talking about taking that time out, it can be easy, especially those you type A leaders, you go-getters, you hustlers, you grinders, to stop and slow down.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound cool and tough, but like think of athletes, think of NBA players, NFL players, tennis players. Like they can't always go on that break. They only get a few minutes. Boxers, and you're in the corner. You gotta reposition to make sure you're giving it your best strategy, your best plan of attack. So that self-awareness is kind of like, am I in the back seat letting my emotions take me for a ride? And how do I get back to the front, which is going to come later.
Great metaphor. And really, self-awareness is the first step in all of the EQ dimensions or skills. If we don't have self-awareness, often we don't know, hey, when should we self-regulate? Or when should I be empathetic? Or, hey, maybe I'm not really motivated to do this daunting task that I have in front of me. Totally. So I think of it like old school curb feelers on a car.
Yeah.
So that cars can run into a curb. I think of it now like our antennas. Our self-awareness is really giving us all kinds of feedback so that we are able to be proactive and make intentional choices.
Yeah, and I'll kind of wrap up or put a pin here of like, it's the difference between a leader and a manager to realize, hey, I'm overworked, I'm burnt out or whatnot, but also to recognize the self-awareness in your team, which is, we're getting ahead, but that's why you have some people who really perform at a high level and others who don't, because they're not checking their antennas crooked. Those of us who remember antennas. Yeah. And so yeah, self-awareness, it isn't the whole shebang. It's literally taking your temperature of like, where am I at? No answer is wrong. It's just, are you getting the right reading? It's, kind of getting into your house and you're like, it's really hot. Well, but the temperature says it's cold. Well, that's inaccurate. So self-awareness is how accurate are you?
And another note to that, once we have an expanded awareness of emotions, we can experience different things. So we would describe that as emotional literacy. It's like when we have an expanded vocabulary with words, we can express things differently. When we have an expanded emotional understanding, we can actually experience things differently. Instead of just saying, yeah, I'm happy. No, I am really joyful. If I'm really joyful, what did I do to become joyful? And importantly, what can I do to duplicate that? Because I want more joy as opposed to meh, right?
Yeah.
Meh probably isn't really an emotion, but how much time do we spend in our life going, meh, right?
Yeah. That's, oh man. And we could keep, I think, adding on, but I'll go back to the backseat driver to the front seat. Self-awareness is, are you on your phone, texting and driving? Never good. But also are you aware of all the things that are going around you, and can you tell the difference between a fellow good driver or someone who's on their own phone? And so being able to see that spectrum, that's a great word, Carla, is really just, it's kind of checking your windshield. Are your glasses clean? To add more analogies, but this is good. We can easily go. I'm already excited to get to the next ones, but if you're a leader, take your temperature, check your antenna. Are you getting accurate results? And we will see you for the next one.
Thanks for joining.
Welcome back to the second dimension of EQ, known as self-regulation. Now, I mentioned earlier, I pride myself on being able to take my own temperature. I'm really upset or angry or excited, but the self-regulation part is where probably for the rest of my life, I'll always need to work on. Of can I? What was the car you mentioned? The buffers or
the curb feelers.
Curb feelers.
Oh, curb feelers.
And just to get like to course correct and to like calm down, do the push-ups, meditate, etc. So why self-regulation in your words, Carla? Why is it so important?
Well, I like to say it's a couple of things. It's our filter, right? So we've all met people that really have no filter, and we usually can spot them in a crowd quickly. We might even have family members, or we might even be that person. But they're also the ability to suspend judgment. So when we can really intentionally assume best intent or positive intent, it helps us to get to a place of commonality and understanding more quickly. Self-regulation is actually part of that. And impulse control, think before acting. Yes. So we don't I had this happen in a debrief. Someone went to go buy groceries one Saturday morning, but instead bought a Mercedes. That's an example of not using self-regulation.
Yeah. Me personally, I was thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, that's when I'm like, I'm tired in the morning. I don't really want to get going. So instead I'll go scroll social media or go find some bad news to get mad at and shake my fist. I know that's not really going to help me to do the things that are important. That's not buying a Mercedes, but it definitely comes on the same line of, of being that person who's going to finish what they started, who's going to be consistent. And I love what you said. Like, you might be that person who maybe over promises, under delivers, or gets frustrated and gives up midway. Maybe you don't see it that way all the time, but it has a lot to do with, do people trust you? Do they trust you to remain calm when things hit the fan? And I'll throw in another topic here, but I think you'll relate. We all can relate. The multi-generation overlap. Do you trust that millennial or the boomer or the whatever? It has a lot to do with, can they self-regulate? And if other people have your trust, probably you're doing that pretty well. And if they don't, maybe you might be a little emotional. And if you can't admit that, okay, but that might be something you want to work on.
So a great example of self-regulation in a meeting, someone says something that feels like a personal attack to you, which obviously is not good anytime, but especially in front of a group of peers. If you are exercising self-regulation, you say, well, thanks for sharing your opinion. I'd like to think about that and get back to you. If you're not exercising self-regulation, you might blurt something out that you don't mean to say, like, why are you attacking me?
Yes.
So that is a game changer, again, when it comes to kind of being present, and it goes back to assuming best intent, but being able to stop the words coming out of our mouth that we might be thinking as the talk bubbles in our brain.
Yeah, and the two R words that come to mind, are you reacting? Someone punches you, you punch back, or someone attacks you, you attack back, or are you responding? They've attacked, but you give that little space where you can actually think, well, I'm going to go left instead of right. And that, you're being more strategic, you're being more accountable, you're being more focused on the actual outcome you want versus the tactful thing that's going on now. And that's why things like practice and things like mindfulness, they're not the most exciting things to do, but they help you for those situations because things don't often go according to plan.
Let's tie self-awareness into it too. So the first step is really self-awareness. So if we have really keen self-awareness, we might be able to say, hey, I'm really frustrated, or, maybe I'm pissed off. And so now I know, going into a conversation, my antenna's up. I know that I'm already feeling this way. Maybe I should reschedule that meeting that I have with someone when I'm a little bit more clear-minded. That would be exercising self-regulation.
Yeah. What do you feel about this phrase, that it's self-regulation is all about being accountable for your decisions, as opposed to they made me mad? It's, well, I chose to do this, and I think it's our language really changes versus really taking responsibility or accountability for what we choose to do. Would you say that's
great
fair?
metaphor. I love it.
Yeah.
Self-regulation is so key. And one other note, extroverts tend to have to work harder at self-regulation. And sometimes introverts will over self-regulate. They'll be more inclined to share when it's one-on-one, but not in a group meeting. So if you're related to that might be a clue too.
Yeah, I love that you point that out. And I might be a little bit more, I'm probably not paying attention to my self-regulation when I say this, but I point out to the introverts or the reserved people as, hey, being passive aggressive is not constructive. Talking to all the wrong people versus the person you have the issue with is not emotionally intelligent. The S behaviors, the reserved people, no dis style, no personality owns the skill that is being self-aware, being able to regulate and make, own your decisions. But just because we shut down and we don't speak up does not mean we're handling the behavior well. And as an extrovert, I know I'm guilty of not doing that as well, but you're right. Typically I just run off and I tell people, it's like, self-awareness is like knowing I'm the Incredible Hulk, and then self-regulation is realizing, hey, I might need to calm down, and then turn back to the doctor, but then bring the Hulk out when it's necessary.
That's right. Yeah.
So
Another a reminder, we can develop all of this, a little bit of work, and we can develop self-awareness and self-regulation, but it does take effort.
exactly. And actually, I'll need to put something on, or add something. This is all about emotional awareness, intelligence from our end. You know, as self-awareness is, do I know my own temperature? Self-regulation is, can I be mindful of those decisions? The later skills are going to be more about other people. And so this is all the things that you as an individual, it's your choice whether or not you want to react or respond. And even as someone who knows this myself, it's a constant practice, because yesterday I might have made a great decision under pressure. Well, today I still need to apply what I know is going to be more helpful in the long run. So we will see you for the next one. It's a pretty good one. Good job.
And thanks for joining again. Stay tuned.
All right, welcome back to the third dimension of EQ, motivation. What's keeping you in line to do the job, do the work that matters, to move past the frustration, move past the roadblocks, and still do what you committed to? So motivation is always a hot topic, because I think most of us don't consider ourselves unmotivated, or at least publicly, when it comes to doing the yard work on the weekend. We may or may not, but why is motivation so crucial to the EQ process?
Well, if you think about it, it's really our why. So one of my favorite questions to ask people, if you knew you couldn't fail and it weren't a matter of making money, let's say you're independently wealthy, what would you do, or what would you do more of? And that really helps us to align with some of our intrinsic motivators. So we tie that to EQ in saying that we pursue things with energy and persistence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for some people, that's making a lot of money. For others, it's maybe making a big difference in the world with other people. But that motivation is what aligns us. I think of it like putting nitrous in your gas tank. What is it that really gets you going and moving at a fast pace?
Yeah. And I think what's important for those who are newer to this, or maybe even a little reluctant to taking the time to apply EQ to their lives, it's like, do you want to do the short-term win or the big picture? Are you in this, again, I use a lot of basketball analogies, just for the point, or are you trying to win the game, if not the whole series? The other day I was watching a game where someone had a vicious dunk, and the opposing team was like, "You're down by 30." And he was like, so motivation is like, look, I'm still going to give it my all.
Yeah.
But also what was he focused more on? That one dunk to smack talk, or to actually, retrieve the game? One of the things that I think as leaders that's important, that I'd love for you to add, is not all of our job isn't always the most exciting. There's always some type of what I call hidden maintenance, aspects of the work that doesn't feed your soul and move you, but you have to do it. If it matters to the bigger picture, you do it. As a leader, if you have other employees who maybe drag their feet, if not procrastinate, if not totally just avoid that work, there's an opportunity to explore for them, but also for yourself. If you find yourself pushing off things that are important, but you're not committed, that's an opportunity to grow that motivational muscle or dimension. Would you agree, or would you add anything different?
Absolutely. I think that why piece is so important, and if we think about some of our bigger goals, whether they be personal leadership goals, professional goals, we often have goals. I think all of us have goals professionally. We don't always do that in our personal lives. But when we really look at motivation, we look at the why behind the goals.
Yeah.
So if you want to buy a house, why do you want to buy a house? Why is that important to you? If you want to have a different job as a people leader, let's say maybe you're an individual contributor and you want to move up in the organization, why is that important to you? Is it because you want to make money? Is it because you want to make a difference? And I think as we attach why, it goes back to our turbo jets.
Yeah. And we'll latch it back on to not only self-regulation, but also self-awareness of, these are all things that we can control for ourselves. You stub your toe, or you lost a customer, or you've closed a great deal and you're super excited and you're going to buy a Mercedes. See the past video for the origins of that story. Motivation is about staying committed to what really matters to you. And as Carlos keeps saying, that why, if you don't know your why, what are you going to stay committed towards?
Mhm.
And so going back to something I think a lot of those of you who are leaders, those of you who have teams, and those of you who've ever been frustrated by your peers or coworkers, self-awareness is you realizing, oh, I'm mad, or I'm frustrated, or I'm confused, intimidated, the list goes on. Or let's go positive. I'm really excited. I'm
Mhm.
overly optimistic, and I haven't really laid out the details.
Mhm.
Self-regulation is okay, but I'm going to make good decisions where people
Mhm.
can trust me. I can trust others. And then motivation is I'm going to stick to it. So here's a
Mhm.
real quick example. You're in a meeting, someone disagrees with your vision, and you're mad. Motivation is you still stick to it. You're a team player with the conversation. You have a healthy debate because you know this mission is worth bringing to fruition.
Mhm.
If you're just focused on the anger, well, your motivation is your energy is being redirected to something that probably is not as worth it in the long run.
Mhm.
Anything else
It's
to
a
add
great
to motivation?
example, great metaphor.
Would you add anything else?
I think that's a really great wrap up of the three interpersonal skills, or as they relate to oneself in emotional intelligence. And coming up, we'll be talking about our skills that relate to others.
Yeah. So yeah, interpersonal on the other half. So the first three are for us as the individual, what we can control, and then the other two skills are what we do, but as it relates to others. So
Mhm.
we will see you for the next one, and work on that motivation.
Yep. Stay tuned.
All right, we are back for now the intrapersonal dimensions or skills of EQ, starting with a very popular term you probably heard of, empathy, or more basically or objectively, social awareness. Are you able to take the temperature of how other people feel? So that's a pretty loaded statement, but from your perspective, Carla, what's the value of empathy in terms of EQ?
It's like you said, well, I would say it's probably one of the most universally used terminologies with emotional intelligence. But I like to say it's meeting people where they are. So if we have sympathy for someone, we say, "Oh, you poor thing." Well, that's not really making me feel any better. But if I have empathy, I can say, "Gosh, that must be really hard."
Yeah.
Oh, they get it, right? Now all of a sudden they're relating to me.
Yeah, and I think it's so funny because I always, even today, I'm sure the way I explain the difference between empathy and sympathy, or at least mine, there's always some like English major or or someone who's like, actually, I don't care about the paper, the actual writing and documentation. What I care about is from a leader who can actually realize, hey, your staff, they said they're fine, but the truth is that fine meant they're not that fine. Hey,
Right.
everyone on the Zoom meeting was okay. Empathy is reading the room uniquely to each person and not treating everyone the same. And it's not the next dimension, which we'll get to, of the social skills or actually interacting, but it's simply like, are you guessing right? And I'll throw something on here. I don't know if you might have a similar take. Those are those of you are my clients who already know DISC, motivators, or some type of personality assessment. My question to them is, if you're so empathetic, would you be willing to bet me if you're right about someone's style? Can you
Mm.
guess that they're a high I or S? And if you're like being general about it, well, sounds like you're not being as empathetic as you could be. So those assessments can actually be some shortcuts, or at least supplemental tools to being empathetic.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And something else that I think of with empathy is really generous listening.
Yes.
So there's a great quote from Daniel Goleman. He says that poor listening habits are the common cold of leadership. And I think that's a great statement in terms of really listening. So, I would add whole body listening, not listening, looking the other way.
Yeah.
Also listening without an agenda. We're not listening to answer or respond,
Yeah.
and listening to really understand. So that's a huge piece of empathy. And think about people that you've worked with or leaders that you've worked for and how they made you feel and how you felt like they listened to you.
Oh yeah. And again, going back to the Zoom era or the remote era where more leaders are dealing with that, like all the more important. It's one thing to hear someone on the phone or guess emotion or feelings over the email or a text. I'm sure you've maybe interpreted a text or two. I know I have, of like, what did they really mean by it? And it turns out not much. But if you have a remote team, you really, what was the term you used? Like you have to choose to invest. Otherwise you're going to miss out on so much stuff. It's easy to assume behavior. And I think I don't know if this is quite right, but the opposite of empathy, I think, is assuming. We assume that Carla's fine, or that person's happy, or they're upset. Especially those of us who are outgoing, sometimes your team, a bunch of reserved people, silence is actually okay, that they're like, but other times silence, when you have a bunch of outgoing, expressive people, it's probably a bad thing, And so empathy is really taking that moment to say, how do they feel? And as the first three dimensions were more about you as an individual. Are you self-aware? Are you regulating? Are you still staying motivated into the thing, to the why that matters to you? This is now the first step of 2 to make sure the topic of emotion, that you're leveraging your own skill to help out that other person. Because I know, those of us who have roommates or kids or, cubicle office or whatever, people on a team, you might be in a great mood. They may not be. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by being inclusive? You said, are you inclusive on our bullet points?
So when we have empathy, self-regulation, we're not, I would call it casting stones. It's the ability to suspend judgment. But when we are being empathetic, we're thinking of all the different variances with people. Are we celebrating diversity and the uniquenesses that each person brings to, whether it's a team or a function or an organization? And when I think of inclusion, it's, no one left behind. Remember when we were kids and we got picked for soccer or war ball or whatever? I always felt bad. I was the last kid, I'm sure more than once. Yeah. But if I wasn't the last kid picked, I always felt really terrible for that kid. That's empathy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, it definitely is a feeling. I think that's the thing is, I always, depending on the group when I'm training, I go, have you ever had someone who comes home or comes in the office and you're like, hey, how you doing? And they're like, fine. Empathy is realizing they might not be fine. I heard something there. Assuming.
By the way, fine really means I'm not fine. I think it's like that.
Exactly. And so, or choosing to not
engage.
Yeah, engage that, or to give that value that, oh, they're really short with me, or there were these other things. To be inclusive to like, oh, they have feelings. Like, actually, here's a wild example. A lot of us, you tell me if I'm wrong, don't have empathy when we drive. We think everyone else is being foolish and reckless, and we are justified, even if we left late or even if we were on our phone for a moment. We're always making excuses for ourselves, but everyone else is a fool. Mm-hmm. Versus when you're empathetic, there's like a mind hack. They say, if someone ever cuts you off, like make up an excuse and you'll get over it. Like say, oh, they cut me off. Oh, they're running to the hospital for their grandma. Or, oh, they need to really use the restroom. And so all of a sudden your brain doesn't waste so much time on shaking your fist at them. So yeah, empathy is, I think we all think we have it, but we don't use it. We don't play that card nearly as much as we could or should.
It can be very situational. And I think the biggest thing is just having that awareness. So often we have triggers from different experiences in our life that sort of prohibit us from having empathy. If we can really fine tune where that belief comes from and think about it, yeah, I think it can help us really, again, I'm not going to be in somebody else's shoes, but I can work to meet them where they are, as opposed to making them come to my side, whatever that is.
Yeah. And you also had said something about being aware of political landmines, of avoiding something or going towards something. Empathy is not, from my opinion, just being nice or even being passive. You could be those things and be empathetic, but I think you could also be a very direct, assertive, maybe even blunt person and have a lot of empathy. Mm-hmm. Of like, hey, I gotta fire you. I can choose to do that with empathy or without. And so I think it's not just about, we hear the words like diversity and inclusion or, well, empathy. I think a lot of times a lot of leaders might brush it off as, I don't got time for that. Well,
Mm-hmm.
How do you want your staff to treat you when you don't have time? Well, if they're being empathetic, be like, okay, I got to come to my boss with more solutions than problems, and I got to come with just the bullet points. You would really appreciate that if they were empathetic to you. It's not giving you a hug necessarily. It's just really realizing, hey, you're in a different reference point, and they can choose to do something about it or not.
Yeah. Like having kids at home with the whole situation with COVID, people that have to homeschool their kids and work from home. That requires a lot of empathy from everyone, including
Yes.
employers. We need to allow people the opportunity to do the best they can given all of our circumstances.
Yes. And let's end on that actually, because very timely. Everyone has, or those people who have kids, and I don't, but it's a big difference between having 15-year-olds who maybe don't do the dishes or turn the music down, and a baby who won't stop crying.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could be like, oh, I know what it's like to have kids. Well, yeah, but you don't know what it's like to have their kids right now during a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
How different would our lives be if you just add one little variance? And so I think that the big thing here, if you're assuming you have the answer, you're not being empathetic
Mm-hmm.
to someone's life, because that's the only way you're going to know, how does this person feel? You have to ask. And then you have to really listen, as you said earlier. And so if you're assuming all day and you know the good and bad of every decision that person's made, you're probably not being empathetic. And hey, you can still get pretty far in life. But if you're really trying to engage that person, get more out of them, really build the trust and make cool stuff, then there's work to be done. And it requires slowing down and really putting on your curiosity hat. So that concludes it for this one. We got one more dimension. It was a good one. I like empathy. We could say a lot more, but we will see.
Stay tuned.
All right. Last but definitely not least is social skills or social regulation, or no, what do you call it? So, I'm sorry, social awareness. Can you factor in that this person, you've been empathetic with them, and now you are going to be much more intentional with how you interact with them, or you don't. So this one is where I think why we do so many team building workshops, coaching, etc., because this really requires a collaborative experience with you as an individual connecting with that other person who might be on a different wavelength, page, time of day. I'll throw a different wrinkle in here. It's one thing to be in an office, different communication styles, different emotional temperatures, but what happens if you're on a different time zone? What happens if you're in a different country? What happens if you're in a different department? There's so many variables. And so social skills is all about, like, are you being the most tactful and strategic you can? Not manipulative, but are you really being mindful of the other person and the actions you want them to take?
And I would relate this in leadership to your personal brand. People don't want to talk about their personal brand frequently, or at least most people don't, because it's like, oh, I don't want to talk about me. But we all have a personal brand, and having awareness around self-regulation or social regulation, I keep getting tripped up on the words too, is so important, because it's the ability to build bridges and networks with other people. It's the ability to interconnect. I think another terminology I would use is really interpersonal skills.
Yes.
How are we connecting with other people? And going back to our social sciences, introverts often struggle with social skills because they don't want to put themselves out there. They often think, well, my work shows for itself, where an extrovert can sometimes be really, more effective at building those relationships, but they can come across as not being as genuine because of that too, because they're just out there.
Yes. And, I used to kind of cringe when I heard this, but the more and more I understood it, I was like, communication or interpersonal skills, it's like sales. At least if you're successful, if you're going to influence someone to your brand or you're doing or relate to them, I think of something as simple as an email. Everyone emails differently. Some people got to tell you their whole life story. Like actually, today, I went and told you about the last 3-4 days, where other people are like, give this to me. social skills or interpersonal skills or sales is realizing, hey, they want something, I want something. Can we actually have a constructive interaction to get what we want? And sometimes it might not be on the timetable, but it's social skills is acknowledging like, oh, right now might not be a great time to ask for the favor or ask them to rush it, or actually it is the best time. Like, actually, I discovered this about a year ago. Some of my clients do way better when I call them at the very end of the day. As much as I would like to talk to them at different points, 4:30, 5:30 works way better with them. I'm going through all the dimensions to get to that place and meet them on their level to create an ideal outcome.
Which is empathy.
Yes. Yeah. Empathy, but that also putting into action. Because I know a lot of times I'd be like, oh, it's 4:30. I don't want to call them at 4:30. Social skills is picking up the phone and doing it on their terms. What about?
I think it's following up with them too, and conflict too. How do we navigate conflict? Do we avoid it, or do we actually engage? Do we do it in a way that's a resolution, a conflict resolution, or do we just create a bomb, right?
Yeah. And I think another way of thinking of social skills as it relates to your emotional intelligence, your emotional quotient, is if you're having one-sided conversations, you're doing yourself a disservice, because now everything is reliant on you. You're holding everyone accountable. Social skills is realizing, hey, I just told Carla, hey, I need this documents, in 2 days. And you're like, yeah, okay. But the truth is, I know Carla is a multitasker and there's a bunch of stuff. If I really want it in 2 days, I got to figure, okay, she heard me, but Carla, you know what? I'm going to email you and just recap the conversation, because I know email is the best way for her to put that into her to-do list or whatnot. It's, if I'm just saying, hey, give this to me, and then leaving it out to you and the universe, that might work out. But if I'm really doing it to the best of my ability, I have to anticipate how you're going to react to that or not react. Because how many times have we asked someone to do something and then come to find out they either didn't do it at all or did it completely wrong, which was basically like not doing it at all. It's easy to point the finger, but it's a two-way street. What do you had mentioned adapting in our bullets, being adaptable for positive change. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, let me spin it a little bit different direction. So when I think of social skills, and branding, how easily do we pivot when it comes to others' ideas or other functions in an organization? How well do we create those relationships? So, a different example, let's say you move to a new city, right? And everyone needs their people, whether it's a handyman or a handy woman, I should say, or a hairdresser or a doctor. We all, we have to find where to go. If you have really great social skills, you might be that person that someone's like, oh, Juan knows this guy. This guy, I've got a leak in my faucet. Juan will know the handy person that can come help fix this. Yeah. Or a barber to go to, or which nail salon should I go to go get a pedicure? I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, no, I totally
path, but it's kind of that natural thing. How do we connect people to others?
Yes, and I think that's a big word, connect. If you are emotionally intelligent, you are connecting with individuals in constructive ways, and individuals seek you out to connect. So here's a little bit, we can edit this one out if it's too rough, but it's like, if people aren't being honest with you of, hey, I have a terrible handyman and I heard you can help me, or hey, I have this unfortunate problem with sales or service. If people don't come to you with things that you can actually help them with. And I'm not saying like just like, hey, they're always complaining, but they're saying, hey, I have this issue and I'm being honest about it, and I heard you can help. Because you can connect me to a solution. That's a sign that, you don't make people feel comfortable or they don't trust you. And maybe it's all on them, but to Carla's earlier point, you're building a brand, whether you like it or not, on how you interact with people already. So this is, it's not last, it's in the order of it. They all matter. But the social skills is all about putting it into action, kind of going back to sales. It's one thing, you can read all the sales books But if you don't adapt to that customer and their situation and show them the benefits, you might not have an effective sales opportunity. So social skills is on a broader sense connecting with people to build things, build trust, build results.
Exactly.
Or at the very least realize we're stuck. You know, this person wants to do it, but they don't have X, Y, or Z.
Think about it in an organization. So, you know, if I have really developed social skills, I know what department to go to, who to talk to, or if someone has an issue, they know they can come talk to me because I've made those connections and bridges between other people. And I think like going into a new organization, I think that can be really challenging for people because they're kind of learning the landscape and who do they talk to, even simple things like, who do I talk to about my payroll with my paycheck or something like that?
Yeah.
But that really is it. Is it something that takes effort or is it something that comes naturally? Typically extroverts are a little bit better at social skills, and introverts, it takes a little bit more practice and effort, I would say.
Yeah. And I could even see definitely the extroverts being better at initiating the interaction, but to actually now, hey, let's listen to each other. You know, I have a tendency to be one-sided of like, hey, Carla, here's all my ideas. And then later on, like, oh, I never asked her what she thought of it, you know, versus the introvert might be great at listening, but they don't want to disrupt, interrupt. But the bottom line is, and you've said it a couple of times, or we both have, people come to you. They trust you to be a problem solver or at least shed new light. You're going to connect them with a person or even just the solution. And so as a leader, think about that. Do people trust you? At the end of the day, as a leader, you don't want to be the guy or woman putting all the fires out. That's what your team's for. But if someone's always coming to you to only present the problem and not only complaining and not saying, hey, what do I do? Like, this is about empowering people to do what they need to do. So you want them to do, or to do what you want them to do because they want to do it themselves. Butchering a famous quote. But again, 5 dimensions. We'll wrap up on the next one. But I think we covered our bases here. You know, basically, it's a verb. Be self-aware, or have social skills. Do it in action.
Yes.
All right, we've covered all 5 of the EQ dimensions: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, social awareness or empathy, and social skills or social regulation. So 5 areas that you might be strong in one or need some development in other. Here's some ways that you can practically apply. And so it's basically asking yourself questions. As I said in the last final, or in the social skills dimension, if you assume you have the answer, you're probably not really working that EQ muscle. So the first question you should ask is, how have I improved it? Chances are, if you're not a teenager anymore, you probably at least, have matured in other ways. So how have I improved my EQ, especially during all this major change, is a really powerful question that probably could or should be at least a daily, maybe not, if not a weekly question you ask yourself. What else, Carla?
And then I think also asking yourself, if I continue on the same trajectory that I'm on and I don't work on my emotional intelligence, what are my deal breakers? What are the opportunities that I could be missing? What are the interactions that I might, mess up in terms of working with family members or colleagues or team members? And what are the lessons that I've learned? How do I focus on the new EQ me? One of the things I love to talk about is, I call it an in-person 360 evaluation. So actually going to 5 or 6 people and just saying, hey, I'd like to ask that you give me some feedback on my emotional intelligence. What do I do well? And what do I not do as well? And then I have to watch myself that I don't react. I just say, thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah.
And if I don't understand something, thank you for sharing. Can you give me a little bit of context around that? But it gives us an idea to say, hey, what are my interpersonal skills? What's working well? And, what's not working as well? For an example, yeah, Carla, you didn't listen to me when I was trying to talk to you the other day and you were talking, texting on your phone. Oh yeah, that wasn't demonstrating very good empathy, was it?
Yeah. And I think that's 360, if you've not done one of those, they are can be a little daunting, but if you want to grow, they're a great thing to hear from the people that you work with every day. So for you to initiate that on your own, one, says a lot about your EQ to begin with, that you're open to feedback. Think about the other people who aren't open to feedback, who defend every observation other people have. You probably draw a lot of conclusions about how they are aware or not, how they regulate or don't, and so on. When it comes to seeking that feedback, that immediately says a lot about where you're at, but then also, as Carla said, what'd you say, thanking, accepting it, that this
Yes,
is.
thank you for the feedback. And if you don't understand, could you give me an example that I might learn from?
Yeah. And I'll not undercut, add on, if not start bookend this. What are you trying to accomplish? In my world, working on your EQ just to be a nicer person is a cool use of time. But that's not why I got excited. I see it like, wow, I'm wasting so much time being mad, frustrated, depressed, anxious. Oh, I'm not regulating properly. And I know if I watch another episode of this show that, has me escape, but doesn't actually get me, back up in that momentum, that's not a good thing. So maybe I should drop and do 20 push-ups, or maybe I should go work out, or maybe I should just grind out the first draft of that blog I've been dreading. EQ, from Juan's perspective, is about getting what you want. And as Carla said, what are the deal breakers? If you don't get what you want, well, your EQ is really the clarity to being like, how much of this can you actually control? If you want to hold your breath for other people to change and become better drivers, by all means. But what you can do is control these things for yourself now. Social proof. Kind of touched on that by asking other people, but I'll kind of probably change this question a little bit, but I think it's important, is how will you know that EQ has been you growing your EQ? Like, what would it look like? Are your Zoom meetings better? Are your sales numbers better? Are the downtime, lost productivity? Like, what do you get out of it? What's the ROI? What's the reality of when this improves? No. Sorry, hold on. So when this improves, so how do you know that this has been worth it? And again, it's going to be worth it regardless, but like, what do you get out of it? What person do you have a better relationship with? Or what person do you give less of your energy or frustrations to, or as your team? But really, especially, we're talking to leaders. If you want your individuals, your contributors, to be more accountable, to be more direct, to be more intentional, if you model that behavior, guess what? They're more likely to. Anything else to add for application? Game changer. Yes. Yeah, that's the irony, is you do this so they'll pick up on it. And, and that's, actually, I'll throw this one more thing on there. To me, when you have a team, not just you now, when your team has great EQ, you will argue, there will be emotions, not the absence of it. It's we can be real and raw and move past this even faster. We can get in the huddle and be like, all right, cut the bull and let's go win the game. It's not just a bunch of nodding heads. Think about when you want your best friend or whoever it is that you trust, you want them to be honest with you. And sometimes that honesty stings a little bit, but that's what you're looking for in the moment, because you're trying to go after something bigger than your personal feelings. Anything else to add?
Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to share a little bit more about emotional intelligence, and check with us to find out a little more if you'd like to learn and take your own personal assessment.
Yes, definitely check out either of our pages, our sites. You want to take the assessment, you want your teams to go, or you want to do something as simple as a lunch and learn to introduce this concept to your peers. We're here for you, and work on that EQ.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.